After college, I moved to Portland, Oregon. And the real reason was that my boyfriend was moving there. My parents were really pressuring me to go to law school, and I managed to beg for a year to spend not going to graduate school, not going to law school. And their idea was, all right, I could do that, but it was preparatory to going to law school. In the back of my mind, I thought, I'm going to use this time to become a writer because that's all I wanted to do. Luckily, and really sort of remarkably, I happened to land in Portland right at the moment that a little magazine was starting up. They were hiring inexperienced people, which completely fit the bill for me because I had no experience. I just wanted to be a writer. And I got the job. So from the get-go, I was writing. I was writing professionally. We were paid so little that it's almost laughable, but Portland was very inexpensive and I really was able to support myself writing. After that job, I was able to parlay it into a job at a very good alternative news weekly that was in Portland. And while I was there, I started strategizing how I would get assignments from national magazines, because even then I knew that it would be hard to vault out of Portland into a bigger market without some clips from bigger publications. And I just knocked on a lot of doors. And I also, through, again, a bit of luck, got a call from Rolling Stone. And there was an editor there who had grown up in Portland and had regularly read the local papers looking for potential writers for Rolling Stone. And he called me and he said, how would you like to write for Rolling Stone? Well, you can imagine when you're 23 and aspiring to be a writer, this is like, you first think it's a crank call. It was not, and I started writing for Rolling Stone. And the way that it works in the magazine world, in my experience, is a foot in the door opens the door wide. And the minute you start writing for a national magazine, your profile is elevated immediately. And I began getting assignments from Glamour and Mademoiselle and other national magazines. I wrote for the Village Voice. This was all while I was living in Portland. In 1982, I moved to Boston. My boyfriend was starting law school in Boston, and I got a job at the Boston Phoenix. And while the Boston Phoenix was still a local publication and had a much bigger profile nationally, from the Phoenix, I began writing for the Boston Globe. In 1986, we moved to New York. And in New York, of course, was my true aspiration, which was the New Yorker. And in my mind, all of this writing had been in preparation for making my real overture to the New Yorker. I heard through the friend of a friend that the New Yorker and in 86 was looking for new writers primarily to do Talk of the Town. So, you know, these were a kind of entry level into the magazine. And I gathered my clips, delivered them to the New Yorker, not knowing anyone who worked there, having no connection, but being extremely hopeful. To my astonishment, I got called by the editor who said, come on in and let's talk. I mean, again, one of these things where you think, is this a crank call? I can't believe it. I went down and met with him. I had a list of 50, maybe I'm exaggerating, 20 ideas for Talk of the Town pieces. And, I was just bubbling over with ideas, and I was new to New York. So I had a lot of freshness in how I looked at the city. He liked a lot of the ideas, and he said, give it a shot, see what you can do. And I set off that day and I wrote my first Talk of the Town piece. I then began writing them very regularly, not quite one a week, but close to it. At one point, I did a talk piece that I felt had the potential to be a longer story. And I went to my editor and I said, can I try a feature? Can I try expanding this and doing a full-length story for the magazine? And he said, again, give it a shot. So that was my first full-length piece for the magazine. And that was in 87, after I had been doing Talk of the Town for about 6 months. In 1992, they made me a staff writer, which is really more symbolic than anything. It just meant that I was acknowledged as a regular contributor to the magazine. And when I finished one piece, I went on to the next. I wasn't kind of approaching them as an outsider. I was expected to have a next idea. And it was, an absolutely amazing experience because it really matched up with my fantasy of what it might be like to write there. Namely, the ideas that I had knocking around in my head, which were not typical magazine stories, they were responsive to, and they understood my perspective, which was in its own way a kind of eccentric one, of what constituted a story. At this time, I was also working on my first book. And it was something that I had conceived of before I got to the New Yorker, but I really started working on it more steadily when I got to New York. And that was a book called Saturday Night. I basically spent Saturday night in 18 very different kinds of communities around the US, writing about what they had in common, what was different, and sort of conjuring the scene of what Saturday night was like in these very, very different environments. A Park Avenue hostess in New York City, a bar band in Portland, a polka hall in Maryland. I really traveled all over the country, and the book took me several years, but it came out in 1990. Again, like working for a magazine, when you write a book, the door opens for you to write another book. At that point, I had written a story for the magazine about this crazy case in Florida, about a guy who was arrested with a lot of endangered orchids that he had stolen out of a nature preserve. I had gone down to write about it for the magazine and did a feature for the magazine. But the minute I finished, I thought, this is a book. I had just finished Saturday Night. It had been published. And I went to my publisher and I said, I know this sounds odd, but I just did this story about this orchid thief, and I think there's a book. My publisher, to his eternal, in my mind, he's the god, said, I don't quite understand what it's about, but go ahead. And that was my next big project, which took me several years to write The Orchid Thief. So that's really been the trajectory. It was sort of one foot in front of the other with some wonderful, some good strategizing on my part, but also finding mentors at points along the way who opened doors for me.